The village of Banako thrived beneath the watchful gaze of ancient baobab trees, where the river sang through the land, weaving past earthen homes and golden fields. In this village lived Bonyarai and Vera, two 14-year-old girls born on the same day, their fates intertwined like the roots of a great tree. Bonyairai's mother, Ifama, was a powerful healer. People traveled from distant lands to seek her remedies, for she was known to cure ailments beyond the reach of ordinary medicine. Her hands, blessed by the spirits, could weave herbs into miracles. But there was one rule every healer knew: honor the ancestors, give thanks to the spirits, and never take their gifts for granted. One fateful evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ifama sat in her hut, mixing herbs in her sacred calabash. The fire flickered, casting dancing shadows on the mud walls. She hummed an ancient song, calling upon the spirits to bless her medicine. Vera and Bonyarai sat outside, listening to the soft melody, their laughter fading into quiet curiosity as the night deepened. Then, without warning, a sharp crack pierced the air. The calabash split in two, its contents spilling onto the floor like lost secrets. The fire in the hut dimmed, and a chilling wind blew through the village, rattling doors and windows. The air thickened with an eerie silence. Ifama gasped, her face pale with fear. She clutched her chest, whispering a prayer under her breath. The villagers, hearing the sound, rushed to her hut. Among them was Nana Wunmi, the oldest woman in the village, her face carved with deep lines of wisdom. She ran her fingers over the broken calabash and shook her head gravely. She who heals must never forget to give thanks, or the spirits will take their due. The debt is unpaid. Bonyarai clung to Vera, fear creeping into her young heart. She had never seen her mother look so afraid. Vera, ever the brave one, squeezed Bonyairai's hand, her eyes darting between the elders. Ifama, despite her strength, suddenly felt weak. Her breathing grew labored. The whispers of the spirits surrounded her like an unseen mist. From that night forward, nothing was ever the same. The once vibrant Ifama lay on her woven mat, her breath shallow, her once strong hands trembling like dry leaves in the wind. The room, thick with the scent of burning herbs, felt heavy with sorrow. Bonyarai knelt beside her mother, gripping her frail fingers, her heart pounding like the village drums during a festival, except this was no celebration. Her mother turned her weary eyes to Bonyarai, the fire within them dim but not yet gone. "My child," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the faint rustling of the wind outside. "The spirits, they do not forget. When we take without giving thanks, they come to collect their due." Tears welled in Bonyairai's eyes. "What do I do, Mama?" she pleaded. "Tell me how to make it right." Ifama squeezed her hand weakly. "You must always honor the ancestors. Never forget the ones who came before us, for they hold the balance between our world and theirs. When you hear the whispers, do not turn away. When the wind carries a message, listen." Bonyarai nodded, though she did not fully understand. She only knew she did not want her mother to leave her. Vera, who had been standing at the entrance, stepped forward and placed a hand on Bonyairai's shoulder. "You are not alone," she whispered, her voice steady. "No matter what happens, I will be here." A faint smile touched Ifama's lips as she looked at Vera. "Good," she murmured. "Every soul needs a sister." A sudden gust of wind blew through the hut, snuffing out the flame of the oil lamp. The room plunged into darkness. When Bonyairai's eyes adjusted, she realized her mother's grip had loosened. Ifama had taken her final breath. Outside, a distant owl hooted, and the leaves of the baobab trees whispered among themselves. The spirits had taken what was owed. Bonyarai did not cry, not yet. Vera wrapped her arms around her, holding her tightly as the weight of loss settled into her bones. Bonyarai had made a promise, and she did not intend to break it. Ifama, Bonyarai mother, was laid to rest, and reality just set in for Bonyarai. The sun had barely risen over the village of Banako, yet Bonyarai was already awake, hauling a heavy clay pot to the river. Her bare feet scraped against the rocky path, and her arms ached from the weight of responsibility that had been thrust upon her too soon. The carefree days of playing with Vera in the fields had vanished like mist at dawn. With her mother gone, Bonyarai, the only girl among her 5 siblings, and her father, a farmer, was well advanced in years, Bonyarai suddenly had to assume a mother's role in the family. She cooked their meals, washed their clothes, and hushed their cries in the night. The weight of adulthood had settled on her small shoulders, leaving little room for childhood. Despite the burdens at home, Bonyarai still attended school with Vera. But it was different now. While Vera eagerly absorbed lessons and answered questions with confidence, Bonyarai often found herself staring blankly at the teacher's words, her mind consumed with thoughts of unfinished chores. The once bright student who had sat beside Vera with enthusiasm now struggled to stay awake in class. Vera noticed the change. Whenever she could, she would rush to Bonyarai's home after completing her own chores, bringing small gifts, fruit, a fresh cloth, or just her company. But their time together was fleeting. Vera's aunt had promised to take her to the city for school, and soon, even those stolen moments of friendship would disappear. One afternoon, Vera found Bonyarai sitting outside their schoolhouse, staring into the distance instead of joining the other children in play. "Come, let's go to the river," Vera suggested, hoping to bring a moment of relief. Bonyarai shook her head. "I can't. There's too much to do." Vera knelt beside her, touching her hand. "You don't have to do this alone." Bonyarai sighed, but deep down, she knew she did. No one else could carry this burden for her. As Vera left that evening, Bonyarai watched her disappear into the setting sun. She envied her freedom but did not resent her for it. She only wished for a moment that life had been kinder. The wind whispered through the trees, and Bonyarai thought she heard her mother's voice in it. She turned, but there was nothing there, only shadows stretching long into the night. As the months passed, the weight of Bonyarai's responsibilities only grew heavier. Meanwhile, Vera's life was about to change in ways neither of them could have foreseen. Vera's aunt, who had always promised to take her to the city for school, finally arrived to fulfill her promise. The news brought mixed emotions. Vera was excited at the thought of new opportunities, but the idea of leaving her friend behind filled her with guilt. "I don't want to go without you," she told Bonyarai one afternoon. Bonyarai smiled weakly. "You must go, Vera. This is your chance. Do not let my burdens hold you back." Vera promised she would return, but deep down, Bonyarai feared that once Vera left, their worlds would never be the same. On the day of Vera's departure, the two friends stood beneath the great baobab tree where they had spent countless afternoons. "Write to me," Vera said, squeezing friend's hand. "Promise me." Bonyarai nodded, though she wasn't sure she would. She had seen enough of life to know that promises were sometimes like the wind, easily made, easily lost. As Vera's figure faded down the dusty road, Bonyarai felt a hollowness settle inside her. The village was the same, yet different. Without Vera, it felt lonelier, as though even the spirits had grown silent. And then, one evening, the whispers returned. The night air in Banako grew heavier as Bonyarai lay awake in her hut. The familiar sounds of the village, crickets chirping, the distant howl of a dog, were interrupted by something else. A whisper. A faint voice carried by the wind, calling her name. She sat up, glancing at her sleeping siblings. Her heart pounded as she stepped outside. The moon hung high, casting silver light on the village. A shadow flickered at the edge of her vision. She turned quickly, but there was nothing there. Only the rustling of the trees. For weeks now, Bonyarai had felt something watching her. It lurked in the darkness, just beyond her sight. And each night, she dreamed of her mother's shattered calabash, the cracks widening as an unseen force whispered, "The debt must be paid." Meanwhile, in the bustling city, Vera's life had taken a different turn. She was thriving in school, soaking in knowledge and adapting to a world vastly different from the village. But despite the excitement, she never forgot Bonyarai. She wrote letters, recounting her experiences, promising to visit soon. Bonyarai received the letters but never responded. She longed to write back, but something held her back. Fear, exhaustion, or perhaps the growing sense that she was slipping into a world Vera would never understand. One evening, as Bonyarai fetched water from the well, she heard a sharp whisper in her ear. "Bonyarai!" She spun around, her breath caught in her throat. The path behind her was empty, yet the presence lingered. The shadows stretched unnaturally, as if something unseen lurked within them. She clutched the bucket tightly, whispering a prayer under her breath. Whatever was following her, it was getting closer. Bonyarai's hope for a fresh start carried her to the bustling town where her elder brother lived. He had promised to take care of her, to enroll her in a well-respected seamstress training center, and to give her the chance at a new life. With a small cloth bundle in hand, she stepped into his home, hopeful yet weary. But reality was far from the dream she had envisioned. Her brother's wife, Etika, did not welcome her kindly. From the very first day, she treated Bonyarai like an unwelcome guest rather than family. "You are old enough to work," she scoffed. "This house is not for idlers." Bonyarai, though exhausted from her journey, was immediately put to work. She cooked, cleaned, and cared for their children, often rising before dawn and collapsing into bed long after nightfall. The days blurred into one another, her training at the seamstress shop becoming just another task to fulfill rather than the opportunity she had once dreamed of. Letters from Vera arrived every few weeks, filled with stories of city life, new friends, and endless opportunities. Bonyarai would trace the words with her fingers, aching to write back, but something inside her stopped her from sharing the truth. What would Vera think if she knew? The pride that had kept her strong in Banako now kept her silent. During the holidays, Vera returned home to their village to visit, and Bonyarai also came home for a visit. Vera was eager to see her best friend. When she finally found Bonyarai at the market, she gasped. The girl who had once laughed freely now carried shadows under her eyes and a heaviness in her step. "Bonyarai!" Vera rushed forward, gripping her friend's hands. "Why haven't you written back?" She forced a smile. "I've been busy. Life there is different." Vera studied her, noticing the way her friend avoided her gaze. "Come, let's sit by the river like we used to." Bonyarai hesitated. "I can't stay long. My brother's wife is expecting me." Something in Vera's heart clenched. This wasn't the Bonyarai she knew. "Are you happy at your brother's place?" Vera asked softly. Bonyai hesitated, then nodded. Of course. I have a place to sleep, food to eat, and I'm learning a skill. What more do I need? But the distant look in Bonyai's eyes told a different story. As Vera returned to the city, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Bonyai's letters became shorter, less frequent, until one day they stopped altogether. And back in her brother's house, Bonyai stared at the ink-stained paper on her desk, unable to write the truth. The shadows in her life were growing darker. The wind howled through the narrow alleyways of the town, whispering through the cracks in Bonyai's small room. It carried voices, soft, eerie murmurs that seemed to call her name. She sat on her thin sleeping mat, staring at the shadows cast by the flickering lantern. Then she heard it. A faint, familiar voice. Bonyai. She gasped and turned sharply. No one was there. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears as she clutched her knees to her chest. The voice was her mother's. She was sure of it. Night after night, the whispers returned. The wind carried her mother's voice, sometimes soft, sometimes urgent. Come, my child. You do not belong here. The shadows in her room seemed to lengthen, stretching toward her, and she felt an overwhelming pull toward the unseen. During the day, she moved like a ghost through her brother's house, avoiding Etika's sharp gaze and the endless chores. She barely ate. She barely spoke. The whispers were always with her now, pressing against the edges of her mind. Far away in the city, Vera was growing uneasy. Bonyai's letters had stopped. The last few had been brief, lacking the warmth they once carried. Something was wrong. One evening, under the glow of a candle, Vera wrote a long letter to Bonyai, pleading for her to respond. She spoke of school, of the new books she was reading, of the festivals in the city. But in the final lines, she wrote what weighed heaviest on her heart. Bonyai, tell me the truth. Are you okay? I feel like something is happening to you. Please write back. But Bonyai never did. The letter sat on her small wooden table, unopened, as the wind whispered once more. Come, my child. Bonyai, trembling, closed her eyes. The whispers had grown louder. Bonyai no longer questioned whether they were real. They were all she could hear. Day and night, they filled the air around her, calling her, pulling her toward an unseen world. One evening, after another grueling day of work at her brother's house, Bonyai sat in her small room, staring at the untouched letter from Vera. She longed to write back, to tell her best friend the truth, but the words never came. The weight of her suffering had grown too heavy. Then, the wind carried the voice once more. Come, my child. It was her mother's voice, tender yet commanding, calling her home. Tears welled in Bonyai's eyes. She no longer belonged to this world. Her spirit had been worn down, her body merely an empty shell. She rose from her mat and walked to the corner where a small bottle of poison meant for rats was kept. Her hands trembled as she poured the liquid into a cup. She hesitated for a brief moment, memories flashing before her. Vera's laughter, her mother's warm embrace, the carefree days in Banako. But the darkness around her had swallowed those memories whole. With a deep breath, she closed her eyes and drank. Moments later, pain seized her body. She gasped, clutching her stomach as a cold shiver ran down her spine. The room spun. She collapsed onto the floor, the cup slipping from her grasp. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, as shadows seemed to close in around her. Etika heard her cries and quickly called her husband. Her brother woke up, and found her motionless body on the floor. Panic surged through him as he lifted her limp form, rushing her to the nearest healer, but it was too late. The spirits had claimed what was owed. Far away in the city, Vera sat at her desk, writing another letter, unaware that Bunyarai would never read it. She smiled to herself, hopeful that this time, Bunyarai would finally reply. But Bunyarai was gone. The news of Bunyarai's death spread through Banako like wildfire. Her body was brought back to the village, wrapped in white cloth, as was tradition. The elders stood in silence as her brother drove her in a car through the dusty paths, his face heavy with grief. Women wailed, beating their chests, mourning the girl who had been swallowed by the spirit's wrath. The burial was swift, for it was said that souls taken by the spirits must be laid to rest before the sunset. As Bunyarai's body was lowered into the ground, a strong wind howled through the trees, sending dry leaves spiraling into the air. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. "The spirits have taken what was owed," whispered Nana Wunmi. "The debt is finally paid." Vera arrived a week later, eager to see her childhood friend, only to find the village draped in sorrow. She ran to Bunyarai's home, her heart pounding, but was met with the solemn gaze of the elders. Her breath caught in her throat. "Bunyarai," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. No, it can't be." Tears streamed down her face as she collapsed to the ground, clutching the last letter she had written, one that Bunyarai had never read. She had come too late. That night, Vera sat beneath the ancient baobab tree, staring at the stars. The wind whispered through the branches, and for a fleeting moment, she swore she heard Friend's voice carried in the breeze. "I'm sorry," she whispered into the night. "I should have been there." But the wind carried no reply, only the echoes of a story that would be told for generations. Vera sat in Bunyarai's childhood home, staring at the empty space where her friend once slept. The air inside felt heavy, filled with the ghosts of laughter, secrets, and whispered dreams. The grief was unbearable. She had been gone for so long, too long, and now her friend was gone forever. Had she missed the signs? Could she have done something to stop this? She found Bunyarai's father sitting in silence near the hearth. His face, once proud and strong, was now lined with sorrow. Vera hesitated before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. Did she ever speak of how she was feeling? Bunyarai's father sighed deeply. She kept everything inside. She carried her burdens alone, just like her mother did. Tears burned in Vera's eyes. And her brother? Did he notice anything? Her father shook his head. He was too busy trying to provide for the family. We all thought she was strong. His voice cracked. But we were wrong. Vera stepped outside and made her way to the old baobab tree where she and her friend once played as children. She ran her fingers along the rough bark, remembering their promises, how they swore to always be there for each other. But time had pulled them apart, and now it was too late. She closed her eyes, listening to the wind rustling the leaves above. I should have written more. I should have come back sooner. The guilt weighed on her, suffocating, inescapable. That night, as she lay on Bunyarai's old mat, the whispers returned, not from the spirits, but from her own conscience. You left. You let her go. She vowed then that Bunyarai's story would not be forgotten. She would tell it, share it, so that no other girl in Banako, or anywhere else, would feel as alone as her friend had. And as she made that silent promise, the wind outside seemed to sigh, carrying her words into the night. In the years that followed Bunyarai's death, Her story became more than just a tragedy. It became a warning passed down through generations in Banako. The elders told it in hushed tones by the fire, their voices carrying the weight of sorrow and wisdom. When we neglect the spirits, they will take what is owed. When we ignore the suffering of those we love, we push them closer to the shadows. Children grew up hearing Bunyairai's name, learning that the whispers of the wind were not just echoes of the past, but a reminder to honor those who came before them, and to care for one another while they still could. Some villagers swore that on quiet nights, when the wind rustled through the baobab trees, Bunyairai's presence could still be felt. That if you listened closely, her voice could be heard in the breeze, a soft lament carried through the air. But Vera refused to let Bunyairai's memory be one of sorrow alone. She dedicated her life to ensuring no girl in Banako, or anywhere else, would ever feel as alone as Bunyairai had. She became a mentor, a protector of young girls, ensuring they had the support Bunyairai never did. She visited schools, taught them about self-worth, about speaking up, about seeking help when the weight of the world grew too heavy. Every year, on the anniversary of Bunyairai's passing, Vera would sit beneath the old baobab tree, whispering stories into the wind. "You are not forgotten, Bunyairai." And each time, as if in response, the wind would sigh through the leaves, carrying Bunyairai's spirit into the night. Do you think the spirits actually killed Bunyairai? Or did she take her own life because life was unbearable for her? Like, comment, and subscribe for more stories. Turn on your notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.